Hello, everybody. I hope you are well. Join me today in a short reading from the last chapter in G.K. Chesterton's The Everlasting Man. I think you'll find this relevant and fruitful. Let me know what you guys think in the comments here. Put my phone on silent. All right. So, in this story of Good Friday, it is the best things in the world that are at their worst. That is what really shows us the world as its worst. It was, for instance, the priests of a true monotheism and the soldiers of an international civilization. Rome, the legend founded upon fallen Troy and triumphant over fallen Carthage, had stood for heroism, which was the nearest that any pagan ever came to chivalry. Rome had defended the household gods and the human decencies against the ogres of Africa and the hermaphrodite monstrosities. Listen to this footnote here. It is interesting to note that in the final decadence of the Greek civilization, mythological characters arose that sported the physical characteristics of both male and female in the same individual. Quote, in the last resort, the exaggeration of sex becomes sexlessness. It becomes something that is much worse than mere anarchy, something that can truly be described as malice, a war, not against the restraints required by virtue, but against virtue itself. The old moral theology called it malice, and there will be no future for the modern psychology until it again studies the old moral theology. End of the footnote. But in the lightning flash of this incident, we see great Rome, the imperial republic, going downward under her Lucretian doom. Skepticism has eaten away even the confident sanity of the conquerors of the world. He who is enthroned to say what is justice can only ask, quote, what is truth? Footnote, Pontius Pilate asked this question in John 18:38 when the truth is standing right in front of him. Chesterton says that Pilate, quote, showed his taste for epigram at a somewhat unlikely moment, close quote. Quote, when the art of controversy comes back, it will not come back from the world of skeptics and iconoclasts. It will come rather from the world of believers and of dogmatists. It will not be the work of men who merely ask questions, but of men who believe that they have found answers. It will come out of the clash of real convictions, which are positive and not negative, not from those who say, quote, what is truth, but from those who can still say, quote, this is truth, not from Pilate, but from Paul, close quote. Back to the text here. So in that drama which decided the whole fate of antiquity, one of the central figures is fixed in what seems the reverse of his true role. Rome was almost another name for responsibility. Yet he stands forever as a sort of rocking statue of the irresponsible. Man could do no more. Even the practical had become the impracticable. Standing between the pillars of his own judgment seat, a Roman had washed his hands of the world. There too were the priests of that pure and original truth that was behind all the mythologies, like the sky behind the clouds. It was the most important truth in the world, and even that could not save the world. Perhaps there is something overpowering in pure personal theism, like seeing the sun and the moon and sky come together to form one staring face. Perhaps the truth is too tremendous when not broken by some intermediaries, divine or human. Here's a long, beautiful footnote on that. Christ, being fully God and fully man, is the intermediary between God and man. But even Christ can be, quote, a truth too tremendous, who also needs an intermediary. Chesterton talks about the saints being intermediaries, such as St. Francis. Quote, St. Francis is the mirror of Christ, rather, as the moon is the mirror of the sun. The moon is much smaller than the sun, but it is also much nearer to us, and being less vivid, it is more visible. Exactly in the same sense, St. Francis is nearer to us, and being a mere man like ourselves is in the sense more imaginable. Quote, the mirror of Christ. This is from St. Francis Assisi, right? And of course, priests are intermediaries. In a wonderful metaphor, he compares priests with fireplace pokers. Quote, fire, the most magic and startling of all material things, is a thing known only to man and the expression of his sublime externalism. It embodies all that is human in his hearths and all that is divine in his altars. It is the most human thing in the world, seen across wastes of marsh or medleys of forest. It is veritably the purple and golden flag of the sons of Eve. But there is about this generous and rejoicing thing an alien and awful quality, the quality of torture. Its presence is life, its touch is death. Therefore, it is always necessary to have an intermediary between ourselves and this dreadful deity, to have a priest to intercede for us, while the God of life and death to send an ambassador to the fire. That priest is the poker, made of a material more merciless and warlike than other instruments of domesticity, hammered on the anvil and born itself of the flame. The poker is strong enough to enter the burning fiery furnace, and like the holy children, not be consumed. In this heroic service it is often battered and twisted, but it is the more honorable for it, like any other soldier who has been under fire. Close quote. Back to the text here. Perhaps it is merely too pure and far away. Anyhow, it could not save the world. It could not even convert the world. There were philosophers who held it in its highest and noblest form, but they not only could not convert the world, they never tried. You could no more fight the jungle of popular mythology with a private opinion than you could clear away a forest with a pocket knife. The Jewish priests had guarded it jealously in the good and the bad sense. They had kept it as a gigantic secret. As savage heroes might have kept the sun in a box, they kept the everlasting in the tabernacle. They were proud that they alone could look upon the blinding sun of a single deity, and they did not know that they had themselves gone blind. Since that day, their representatives have been like blind men in broad daylight, striking to right and left with their staffs and cursing the darkness. But there has been that in their monumental monotheism, that is, that it has at least remained like a monument, the last thing of its kind, and in a sense motionless in the more restless world which it cannot satisfy. For it is certain that for some reason that God is in his heaven. For it is certain that for some reason it cannot satisfy. Since that day it has never been quite enough to say that God is in his heaven and that all is right in the world, since the rumor that God had left his heavens to set it right. And as it was with these powers that were good, or at least had once been good, so it is with the element which was perhaps the best, or which Christ himself seems certainly to have felt as the best. The poor to whom he preached the good news, the common people who heard him gladly, the populace that had made so many popular heroes and demigods in the old pagan world, showed also the weakness that were dissolving the world. They suffered the evils often seen in the mob of the city, and especially the mob of the capital during the decline of a society. The same thing that makes the rural population live on tradition makes the urban population live on rumor. Just as its myths at the best had been irrational, so its likes and dislikes are easily changed by baseless assertion that is arbitrary without being authoritative. Some brigand or other was artificially turned into a picturesque and popular figure and run as a kind of candidate against Christ. In all this, we recognize the urban population that we know with its newspaper scares and scoops. But there was present in this ancient population an evil more peculiar to the ancient world. We've noted it already as the neglect of the individual, even of the individual voting, the condemnation, and still more of the individual condemned. It was the soul of the hive, a heathen thing. The cry of this spirit also was heard in that hour. Quote, "It is well that one man die for the people." Close quote. Yet this spirit in antiquity of devotion to the city and to the state had also been itself and in its time a noble spirit. It had its poets and its martyrs, men still to be honored forever. It was failing through its weakness in not seeing the separate soul of man, the shrine of all mysticism, but it was only failing as everything else was failing. The mob went along with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the philosophers and the moralists. It went along with the imperial magistrates and the sacred priests, the scribes and the soldiers, that the one universal human spirit might suffer a universal condemnation, that there might be one deep, unanimous chorus of approval and harmony when man was rejected of men. There were solitudes beyond where none shall follow. There were secrets in the inmost and invisible part of the drama that had no symbol in speech, or in any severance of a man from men. Nor is it easy for any words less stark and single-minded than those of the naked narrative even to hint at the horror of exaltation that lifted itself above the hill. Endless expositions have not come to an end of it, or even to the beginning. And if there be any sound that can produce a silence, we may surely be silent about the end and the extremity, when a cry was driven out of the darkness in words dreadfully distinct and dreadfully unintelligible, which man shall never understand in all the eternity they have purchased for him. And for one annihilating instant in an abyss that is not for our thoughts had opened even in the unity of the Absolute, and God had been forsaken for God. Footnote, quote, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Close quote. Final two paragraphs of the text. "They took the body down from the cross, and one of the few rich men among the first Christians obtained permission to bury it in a rock tomb in his garden. The Romans setting a military guard lest there should be some riot and attempt to recover the body. There was once more a natural symbolism in these natural proceedings. It was well that the tomb should be sealed with all the secrecy of ancient Eastern sepulture and guarded by the authority of the Caesars. For in that second cavern the whole of that great and glorious humanity which we call antiquity was gathered up and covered over, and in that place it was buried. It was the end of a very great thing called human history, the history that was merely human. The mythologies and the philosophies were buried there, the gods and the heroes and the sages. In the great Roman phrase, they had lived. But as they could only live, so they could only die, and they were dead. On the third day, the friends of Christ, coming at daybreak to the place, found the grave empty and the stone rolled away. In varying ways they realized the new wonder, but even they hardly realized that the world had died in that night. What they were looking at was the first day of a new creation, with a new heaven and a new earth, and in a semblance of the gardener, God walked again in the garden, in the cool, not of the evening, but of the dawn. Thanks for listening.